Board of Education public session to order, please. If we could all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Members of the public, we're going to take care of a small matter of business that we need to do to clean up our agenda for this evening. At this point, I'm going to introduce a motion to add an agenda item to our evening. This will go in first item for new business. Meredith? Move that the Weston Board of Education add the following item to tonight's agenda. Discussion of potential that would affect Weston Public Schools. May I have a second, please? Thank you. All in favor? He's cutting in and out. Thanks.
You got it?
Yeah, thanks. So, members of the public, when we get to public comment, if any of you are wanting to speak about regionalization or any of the legislation coming out of Hartford, please feel free. And then the Board of Ed, this will be the next item on the agenda for our discussion tonight. So with that, the first part of our meeting this evening is one of the best things that we do here, and that's where we actually recognize our students for exemplary accomplishments. And tonight we are going to be recognizing first some All-State athletes, and then we have some All-American athletes.
Some of our athletes are still downstairs at the pool. It is senior night for the boys swim and dive team tonight, so some of our girls swimmers are helping with those festivities. So I know they'll be with us shortly, but we'll get started now and hopefully they'll join in. We average nearly 50 All-State athletes a year. It's really incredible, and it amazes me every time I give that stat. I think the actual number is around 47 right now, but it's still pretty amazing. You know, you go into gyms all over the state of Connecticut, and schools have the names of their All-State athletes up on a board in their gym. And I get asked all the time, well, how come you don't have our names up on the board? Because they'd be about that big. There's so many, we couldn't fit them all, even if we put them in every school in our district. So the athletes amaze me. We're going to start with our All-State athletes. And first from volleyball is Kate Anderson, who I don't see here. Okay. Next, cross country, Mia Axelson. Come on up, Mia. Congratulations. And you're going to stay right over here, Mia. We're going to get a picture with all of you. Swim and dive, Alexandra Bradley. She might be downstairs still. Swim dive, Serafenko. Swim and dive, Bella Gay. One of our divers, Elizabeth Katz, who could not make it this evening. Another swimmer, Samantha Kim. And another swimmer who I did see downstairs, and that's Katie Linnell. And her sister, who is also downstairs, Nicole Linnell. You can tell our girls swim and dive team had quite a season this past fall. Another swimmer, Alexa Pappas, who is downstairs. Another swimmer, Charlotte Petrocelli, who is also downstairs. All-State Girls Soccer, Sadie Rudolph. I don't see Sadie. And All-State Boys Soccer, David Tambury. The next four girls, an All-American relay team for our swim team this past fall, and an amazing season for that team. They took first in conference, undefeated season. They took first in states in class size, and then they finished third in open. So against all the other humongous schools in our state, they finished third in the state, and it was really close to second. So they did an amazing job. But the four All-Americans from this past fall, Charlotte Proseller, Alexa Pappas, Katie Linnell, and Bella Gary.
All right, members of the board, if I could have a motion for our All-State Athletes, please.
Move that the Weston Board of Education recognize the All-State Athletes for fall 2018.
May I have a second? Thank you, Melissa. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Recognition of our All-American athletes.
Sure. I move that the Weston Board of Education recognize the All-American athletes for fall 2018.
Second? Thank you, Ruby. All in favor? Okay. Thank you. At this point, we do have to approve quite a few minutes. January was a busy time. I hope everybody had a chance to review the meeting minutes from our various executive sessions and budget meetings during the month of January. And if so, if I could please have a motion, please.
Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the minutes from the December 18th, 2018 workshop, January 9th, 2019 workshop, January 17th, 2019 operations and capital budget presentation, January 22nd, 2019 executive session, January 22nd, 2019 regular session, January 22nd, 2019 fiscal 20 budget, and January 24th, 2019 adoption of budget.
Thank you. Second?
I second.
Great, thank you. Anyone have any corrections or adjustments to the minutes before we vote? Right. All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you. At this point, it is time for public comment. I just want to remind everybody that it is comment. We cannot engage in a dialogue back and forth, but we do want to hear from you. So if anyone would like to speak this evening, please feel free, raise your hand, and then I'll ask you to come to the table. You'll need to do a quick introduction with your name and the street that you live on, and then we would love to hear from you. Hold down the little button at the bottom till the light turns green. There we go.
I'm on Heritage Lane, and I just wanted to really now just say thank you for adding regionalization to the agenda. It was something that I've been hearing a lot about. It's been in the news a lot. There's been a lot of conversation about, and I'm glad you're taking the time to talk about it. So thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm Dave Tambori. You might recognize the name, 32 Alwyn Lane. I'm severely concerned about the regionalization effort, and I recognize there should be a partnership, I think, with the Board of Ed and the citizens. And if you need help from parents, please let us know. I think Wilton is doing a standout job kind of organizing forces in the community. So please reach out, and we'd like to help. Thank you.
Thank you. Katie Morvillo, I think you wanted to speak this evening.
Hi,
Hi, I'm Katie Marvillo. I'm one of the founders of the Weston High School St. Baldricks Club, which we're proud to say is now one of the largest clubs in our schools. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we partner with students from the middle and intermediate schools, as well as dozens of volunteers and Weston families to raise awareness and funds for the St. Baldricks Foundation, a charity dedicated to raising money for childhood cancer research. Specifically, we wanted to take this opportunity to apprise you of our upcoming St. Baldricks Team Weston Community Head Shaving event, which is being held on March 16th at St. Francis from 6:30 to 10 p.m. As of this afternoon, we have at least 45 registered shavees who are brave enough to go bald for this amazing cause. The event will also include a silent auction made possible by very generous donations from local vendors and sponsors, a meet and greet with former NFL player Chris Canty, live music from the Weston High School band Caravan, and terrific food and drink. Last year, Assistant Athletic Director Dan Frank joined us, and we raised over $46,000. We're hoping to top that again this year with him. And I know that Mrs. Albert's son, Andrew, was our top fundraiser last year. I know Mrs. Albert and her family will be there, and we're hoping many more of you will join us as well. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Katie. Anyone else? Right. David, you're up.
Hello, everybody. I guess maybe I just would explain why I'm here for those who aren't familiar. So I'm the executive co-president of the school also, and I serve on the Board of Ed just to do monthly updates of what's been going on in the school lately. Recently we had, through the SRO, Officer Joe McGowan, we had a one-day seminar for distracted driving. So there were simulators, texting and driving, and we had an assembly and an hour-long presentation about that, which was really good. We had a Spirit week last weekend, which was cut short, but that's okay. We're going to redo the pep rally in the upcoming weeks. But definitely the most recent news and the biggest effort on behalf of student government was an open forum that we hosted. So each grade with somewhat limited administration had a conversation with their respective student bodies about school climate and specifically anti-vaping. So that was about an hour long. It was open forum, so there was question and answer. We worked a little bit with the administration to discuss the agendas and what we would talk about, but it was very much student run, and the feedback was very positive on that. Just given a topic like vaping is very difficult with the policies in place. One thing is to be told not to do something by the administration, but the student body and student government in general felt that a concerted effort needed to be made on behalf of the student body by the student body. This is the first time we've ever done something like this, and there were some wrinkles, but overall I think it was a very, very positive event. So that's what we had probably spent the last 2 to 3 weeks working towards, and that was last week or about a week and a half ago.
We had a pretty open conversation about vaping and about student responses to administration and some of the efforts. Did you get a sense that the students are now kind of coming on board with the critical nature of this issue, or that they want to engage in ways to try to proactively deal with the issue?
Yeah, so we wanted to definitely approach this differently than how it would have been if it had been just an administrative session. We tried not to go with the punishment first, and we had talked with the high school administration, and they're considering medical procedures to go through. So they used to have a group called Smoke Stoppers come in when smoking cigarettes was an issue. But something student government and the high school administration's been working towards together is recognizing that this is no longer like a trend or a fad, but a clinical medical addiction, and that the people who are punished, yes, need to serve some sort of punishment, but retroactively need to work towards recovering from this clinical addiction. So there was also a big emphasis after we talked to Ms. Dirio for a long time that as long as you have not been punished for anything or you were not caught and you have nothing on you, we discussed total clemency for anyone who went to any high school administrator and said, I need help with this. That was the first time that's ever been discussed. You know, it was kind of a rough idea, but the student government and the student population basically felt for this to be an open discussion, we need to sort of combat this. You know, there certainly needs to be punishment for those who are caught, but there are, for people who are on the fringe or think there's a serious possibility of resolving their addictions, you know, the administration needs to be very open and willing to help.
Thank you.
David, I have a question for you. You know, you said something interesting, which is that you have to kind of approach it from a clinical angle, and a lot of kids who are doing this have already become addicted. We know the science behind it, that one Juul pod has as much nicotine as a pack of cigarettes or more. So what would you say is the best approach for sharing that information and catching kids before they get addicted?
Yeah, so one thing, you know, like this was an open forum, so we were responding to complaints that we had. So a few things that came up were, you know, how does the student body respond to it? Like basically a scare tactic, which is what it was. So there are posters basically posted all over the bathrooms and all over the hallways and in the bathrooms and on the stalls that have some of these very shocking images and pictures and statistics, which for the most part got crumpled up and thrown out, as disturbing and as sad as that is to hear. You know, I'm the senior class advisor, so I was with the seniors, and a lot of them basically were expressing the fact that the prevention aspect of things, it needs to be targeted more towards sophomores and seniors, whereas juniors and seniors, there was more of a concern. They were asking questions about resolving clinical addiction. So they were basically, what they said is, you know, they want to have, actually it's something we were continuing to work on, or like anonymous seminar. So basically there's going to be like a medical professional that comes in, and anyone who feels the need or want to go a completely safe environment would be willing to attend outside of school hours. So that was basically the greatest consensus we reached, and the feedback from the senior and the junior class was a lot of these people who are doing it are very cognizant of the fact that it's damaging to them, and they're on the, you know, the treatment phase more so than the preventions phase.
Okay. So that's very helpful. And I just want to clarify, when I say catching kids before they become addicted, I don't mean catching as in catching them as in trouble. I mean catching as in identifying them and trying to connect with them before it happens. But it sounds like what I'm hearing is that this is a problem that's best dealt in different ways depending on the age band. And so maybe even bringing something down, you know, SRO McGowan and SRO Kim are in constant communication, maybe even as we look to bring that down to the middle school and really educate before it becomes a problem. So and that's very valuable insight. What I'm hearing is depending on the age of the student, you have to approach the problem from a different level. So that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
So David, I mean, last time you spoke to the board and the public on this, you were, and this is a big compliment, so be ready, you were very bold. It's my third year as superintendent, had wonderful predecessors in your seats, and I say this is all compliments to them, but you took it to the step it needed to be taken, which is you were willing with your compatriot to say, nice effort, but it could be better. Nice effort, but it could be better. And that's a bold step for a student to do in the midst of adults and professionals. You've gone even further, which I really appreciate. I wasn't around for the day, but I was tracking about understanding it, seeing what's happening. So here's my return challenge to you for the compliment. I would ask you to focus your time on this as you can as a student leader, because this is such a pivotal issue. It won't get resolved in the rest of your days and weeks here, but you can really leave a mark for us to follow as to what is the student perspective on this? How might those who follow, because this is such a critical issue. Weston is in a mob on this issue. It is so crowded on this problem. And so if you can give us some clarity that'll be a wonderful legacy. You leave lots of legacies, academic, athletic, all the rest, but this could be very important. So take the compliment, but please take the challenge.
No, absolutely, and I'll be
Please.
in touch.
And every month, we'd love to hear an update.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was going to be my next point. You know, the executive branch of student government is going to continue to meet with the administration, and I don't know about the other grades, but the senior discussion was completely taped, so we're listening through the tapes again, and basically are going to go prong by prong, sit down with administration again, and I'll definitely update you at the next meeting on the 25th.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very much. So as we're moving into our new business, I have to admit I was a little remiss at the beginning of our meeting. There are only 4 board members here tonight. We have one person away on vacation, and we have one person who is ill. But since our last meeting, we have had a resignation. Sarah Spalding has resigned her position on the Board of Ed. She's still a great supporter of the schools, but just as the people sitting here at this table, this is a demanding job, and everyone has to take family first. So there will be an opening on the board, which will be filled shortly as an appointed position for the time being. So she will be joining us next month to be recognized for her work over the past years on behalf of the district. So we are now going to quickly delve into the new agenda item that we introduced, which is the discussion of regionalization. Since Hartford came into session in January, there's been several bills introduced that are involving regionalization. The Board of Ed takes anything that impacts our schools very seriously. All of us are residents of the town of Weston, so some of these bills, in my opinion, would have a drastic effect on the town that I chose to raise my family in, and it would change that town not for the better, in my opinion. I wanted this on the agenda so that my fellow board members could voice their opinion about this, and assuming everyone feels the same way, our Board of Selectmen just last week actually voted in favor of a statement essentially supporting the fight against some of this legislation coming out of Hartford. I would like for our first pass at dealing with this would be, hopefully, everyone take a moment and review the statement, and we could endorse that statement. And then I think Dr. McCursey and I can then talk about next steps as what we can do as a district and as a board to work with our residents here in town and with our neighboring towns to continue these conversations. So I'll give everybody a moment to read the statement while for members of the public, I know I got calls from a couple parents, why hasn't the Weston Board of Education said anything about this? We are governed by the Freedom of Information Act, which means that we have to conduct our business in public. And even as something as coming to an agreement that we want to oppose a legislation, we have to have that conversation in public. And this is the first meeting that we've had since this whole flurry of bills have been introduced. So I appreciate the patience, but we did need to take the time to wait until we had a meeting so we could properly have these conversations in a legal forum. So members, I don't know if you have any questions about the Board of Selectmen's statement, if you have any issues with their statement, happy to discuss. Right. Need a very simple motion that we would like to endorse and support the Board of Selectmen's statement from February 21st.
Is there a draft, or you just want me to go?
Nope.
Okay. Move that the Weston Board of Education endorse the February 21st, 2019 statement from the Selectmen's Office regarding the stance against regionalization.
Thank you. May I have a second? Thank you, Ruby. All in favor?
Discussion?
Oh, discussion. Yes, sorry.
Yeah. I wanted to thank the people that came out tonight to speak about regionalization, and I know that there's a lot of talk that's happening at the town level and within the schools. And I think that it's important that as we seek to advocate for ourselves, that we realize that we're actually advocating for all of Connecticut's children and all of the towns. The worst thing that could happen is if in an effort to fight regionalization, we start pitting the towns against each other and saying, I don't want to be aligned with this town, or I don't want to be aligned with that town. A lot of towns might not want to be aligned with us, just like we don't want to be aligned with another town. It's not an issue of equity, and it's not an issue of education. It's an issue of control. And having control and influence over the type of educational system that you want to offer. Here in Weston, the people who have come to Weston, the people who have moved to Weston, the people who work here have embraced what Weston education stands for, which is a small school district. There is a small school philosophy that has been running throughout education for decades, and it's a philosophy, and it's a mindset, and it's attractive to people who come here, and it is possibly not as attractive to people who seek larger towns or more urban environments or larger school systems. So I just want to highlight the fact that as we fight back against these bills, which are maybe perhaps with the best of intentions, but ill-conceived and not very well applied, that we're not divisive, that we're unifying in citing the reasons for objecting to them.
Yeah, I think a critical thing is some of our neighbors are much larger school districts than us, and they're very good school districts. But there's something special about being here in Weston. The opportunity that we afford our students for leadership, participation in a wide variety of activities, and just the individual focus that the administration and teachers can give to students here in Weston is different, and it's unique, and it's special, and it's why I chose to raise my family here. And I will be very happy to do anything to make sure that we're able to maintain that for future generations of Westonites. I do know there is a very active group out of Wilton. I've been in contact with the board chair in Wilton. There is a large contingent of Wilton residents who will be going to Hartford on Friday. The Education Committee is actually having its first public hearing on some of these bills on Friday. Bill, I know you don't like surprises in meetings, but this one I just have to bring up. I do know they are giving excused absences to their high school students who choose to go to Hartford to discuss this. I haven't had the question asked of me as of yet, but we do have very active students, and if they choose to go, if you and Lisa have given any thought to an excused absence for them, and I apologize for the late notice.
Yeah, I think the issue would be timing, and is this the penultimate moment? There's going to be a lot of presence in Hartford on Friday. Several area supers are going to be there. There's going to be plenty of very strong vocal presence against this. Indeed, depending on if you endorse support for this, I think one thing you may want to do is endorse support for work by yourself as chair, as the spokesperson for the board. And while I've had a statement out now for about 8 weeks, it got pretty good media play in Connecticut against this issue. There's more I can do, but I think having the endorsement of the board, so as your, if you will, as the executive officer of the organization, the superintendent, to be active. But there'll be a lot of activity in Hartford this Friday. My concern would be value add at this late date. We lost some school days this past week, so it's not it's sort of that value add relative to instructional time, and I have to coordinate with Lisa on that. So I want to be very cautious because there are going to be other points of emphasis. Lewis is planning and willing to go up on Friday, both as a representative of the district, once you all have voted that we're actually working on this, and he actually bring quite a good presence to the table. There's a slot to actually testify. I'm trying to slot Lewis into, because it's one thing to be on the list waiting to get to the table. It's another to have someone say, I'll step aside for you to get you to the table, and we're working on that. So that's a long answer purposely to say we care, it matters. I would want to be very careful on the value add of students.
I agree. I just wanted us to know that question may be presented.
I mean, you can, I've been in the movement business a long time, and often students are put into the fulcrum when the value add, frankly, is very mixed in terms of the difference made at that moment. I mean, you want to pick your moments, so that's what I would think about. So, but I would also say to the whole board, there's been a lot of activity on this, a lot of pushback, and I think Weston should join that.
So we would actually formally vote to endorse this statement and then endorse me to speak on behalf of the board in opposition to these bills as they come out. And also, we would want to authorize Lewis to speak on our behalf.
I'd make it more of a generic that you were encouraging the administration, because
Okay.
it could be anyone at any point. but
Encourage the
just-
administration to be active in discussing these on behalf of our district.
So I'm going to withdraw my previous motion. I'm going to withdraw my previous motion and move that the Weston Board of Education endorse the February 21st, 2019 statement from the Selectmen's Office, and furthermore authorize Gina Albert to speak on behalf of the board regarding this issue, as well as district administration to become active to advocate
Thank
our
you.
position on this issue.
Thank you. May I have a second? Thank you. All in favor? Thank you.
And I'll certainly talk with Lisa about the Friday situation.
And you raised some very, very valid points, Bill, and it could be just even educating some students about just judging the best use of their time, and having, positive conversations around how to choose their moment to get involved might be beneficial.
Right.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the discussion and vote regarding the emergency repair for the middle school.
So we did have a sewage overflow on February 19th at the middle school. It was discovered a septic tank near the stairs of the entryway that was believed to be defunct was still operating, as it was connected to the middle school but not actually connected to the xenon plant. And the septic fields that were associated with that tank were actually where the xenon plant was built. So as a result, we called Viola North America, who is our xenon maintenance provider, to provide emergency assistance in the cleanup and the repair work, along with coordinating with the health department and DEP to ensure everything was properly cleaned up. On Friday, February 22nd, Viola proposed a permanent repair, at which point we met with members of the Board of Ed, the Board of Selectmen, and the Board of Finance to discuss the repair. The repair would connect the lines from the middle school that were previously going into this tank directly into the xenon plant. So the cost was estimated to be between $300,000 and $500,000. The wide range, given that there was an uncertainty in terms of what they would find when they started to do the work. At that point, after a discussion, we gave the verbal go-ahead to do the repairs. While early estimates look to be roughly around $375,000, so less than the $500,000, we are going to ask for a supplemental appropriation of up to $500,000 until the final invoices are determined, and we know exactly what the full dollar amount will be, which is in line with what we discussed on Friday. The repairs were completed late Sunday, with minor touch-ups continuing, such as seeding the area where the tank was previously at and then removed. So Viola, along with the administration, will bring a comprehensive report to the March Facilities Committee meeting to discuss a little bit of background information, the timeline from February 19th to Sunday, along with some findings and pictures of the actual work in the tank and everything that occurred.
So let me, before discussion, underscore the last part that Rich said. First off, this is a new company managing the xenon plant. I think we're fortuitous. This is the company. From my own direct interactions with them, they're incredibly thorough, professional, and identified a situation that was not known to us and then came in with a correction. What's very important to me as superintendent is the beginning of reporting out to you in the community on March 7th as to the whole entire situation. So Viola will be presenting a very detailed report. It won't be complete on the 7th, but it'll be substantial. They're targeting that as a key date to come forward with exactly from where they sit, what they learned, what they saw, both immediate but backtracking as to the situation. And also, in addition to that, facilities, Rich Rudel and Joe Leanick will present a report on the 7th. The Facilities Committee will then come to the full board on exactly the situation. The full report from Viola, which includes engineering, stamps, and all the rest. Deep authorization is already there. The Wilton Westport Health Department has been involved and approved everything. That full report may be another couple weeks after the 7th of March, so by, I would think, the 21st into the 28th, roughly, you'd have an entire full reporting. At that point, I'll look at that report. The board may want to look at the report and see what else we need to know. The town may need to know more. But I would urge people to really focus on that. Is my request that as of the 7th, you begin to get a full reporting of what occurred, why, and analysis, and to figure out what next steps are. Nobody wanted this to happen. Nobody desired it. We have to figure out how it happened, why, what the history is. What's very important is, like other towns around us, and nobody likes this, but other towns around us, Westport, Greenwich this year, have had major facility failures, and the towns did come forward with that resource to solve that problem. Then they too went back to examine exactly what went on to cause it. So unfortunately, we are in that same mix, but with other very similar districts.
And I just want to let the board know that during the whole process last week, we've been in very close conversations with the First Selectman and the Chair of Board of Finance regarding all of this. Bill has kept them appraised of the plans for the reporting back to us and making sure they are in the loop on everything, and they have been very supportive through this process.
So I look forward to hearing the report and just kind of trying to identify the cause, and I think that's important. And certainly I think it bears saying that this was an incident that occurred due to a situation that existed long before any of us came here, right? So, and that's not to say that we're assigning blame or anything else like that, but I think we're going to find that this is a situation that is potentially decades old that cropped up. My question is, in searching through the records of the district and determining how our buildings are sited and what the facilities are we going to do an analysis and find out if there are any other locations on campus where an unknown tank or an unused tank or a tank that was supposed to be closed off that exists, so that we could prevent this from happening again?
I think it's an excellent question. I think we should have that on the list of action steps. I think there's a series of lessons from this that we will have as the facilities team will have, as well as in a sense, independent, brand new to us, but it's not an independent study. But Viola may have some observations in that regard too.
Okay.
So I think those are the exact kind of questions I would hope the board would be raising as you look at this, analyze it, so that we try and, as best we can, head off any like situation.
Okay, thanks. And I do have some compliments coming, but I just have some analytical questions first. Rich, is any of this covered by insurance?
So we did report it to KERMA, just in case. We do have a $25,000 deductible, but I would doubt that it'll be covered by insurance. But we don't have a definitive answer yet.
Okay. The reason being, this is not the kind of claim that.
It was I think it'll be in the report, but it was essentially a tank that couldn't go anywhere because there was a building built on top of the septic fields.
Okay.
Yeah, and we can discuss. I mean, obviously, issues of insurance could involve potential litigation and so forth. So maybe we could talk about that in executive session.
Okay.
When we have information, which we don't have right now.
Okay. Okay, that's it for the questions. I did want to take a moment to just to commend everyone involved with this. I wanted to start with Dr. McCarthy and just say that I appreciated the communication, and I thought that the communication was very clear and frequent. There were a lot of questions being asked. Obviously, there was a lot of uncertainty when we first heard the news of the problem. And when I say we, I mean the community at large. When we first heard of the magnitude of the problem, speculation was that there could be a lot of time missed. So I felt the communication letting us know what the timeline was going to look like as best you could in a difficult situation was important. I think to have this happen on a Tuesday night and to be back in school on Wednesday speaks a lot to our team, to our facilities team, and to everyone who was involved to get that wrapped up so quickly. And the efforts of the staff, specifically at the middle school and the high school, for making the accommodations to get what, from all accounts, was an abbreviated but meaningful day in for the students. that they were able to do that and just to maneuver in that way. So I just wanted to send thanks all around, because this was obviously an unpredictable situation and something that just kind of came up, and I thought it was handled extremely well by all parties involved. Thank you.
I just want to second what Dan just said, just speaking with families in the community. I think you guys did a fantastic job communicating effectively with the town and with the parents, and having that seamless transition of that one day into the high school. The only question I have is there going to be new yearly maintenance costs on this area going forward, now that we know that it's there? Anything separate to any of the other plants on the property?
No, so the xenon plant has capacity to take that area that wasn't connected.
Okay.
It should have just been connected when the xenon plant was built.
Right.
What we will probably look at, the company Viola is going to do a test actually this Sunday. They weren't able to do it this past Sunday because of the weather. It'll be a test to see if maybe there are any roof drains that are connected to the xenon plant, so you're putting rainwater into the xenon plant, which we shouldn't be doing. So that test will determine whether or not maybe we have a capital project that would have to come at a later date,
Okay.
but there shouldn't be any more operating expenses.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you can be assured, because I had a dry run of the type of report you'll receive on the 7th from the Viola people. Literally, hour by hour, they gave me a report this morning going back to that Tuesday night, what they were doing, who was on site. And so that's that level of detail that you'll get, with lots of visuals to give you a real documented sense of what occurred. And then also, it certainly opens the door for other discussions around maintenance, other issues, other things they found they want to make sure that you're aware of. And I think on the 7th will be a good time for you to hear that and have that documented, because they've starting Tuesday at about 6 p.m., they've been almost full on in this building, analyzing and understanding it for what went on, not simply just that one area, so the very full understanding. Let me just direct the compliments on the management of students to, Ken, Lisa, and Dan in particular. They put their minds together fast. Others stepped up, but I think it was really those three who organized it. And Dave, send the thank yous back to your fellow high schoolers to be welcoming students in. I tried in the super notes to the board the other night, take Ken's writing and say that actually more than I could express, that was a very valuable several hours, because we were able to take care of a couple things that we knew needed to get done, and it was a great moment of creative leadership. One of the topics that had to get paid attention to, sorry to be blunt, was sexting, and our understanding of the middle schoolers, the great dangers of that. So we were able to draw on Officer Kim and our great relationship with Weston Police to do that. Also was an important opportunity, actually the same day then as you had 8th grade orientation that night, so that was actually fortuitous to have 8th graders begin to see what it means to be in the high school and learn that they're about to get the level of work kicked up a little bit and things like that. So plus they had a dance unit and that they're able to dive into. So they maximized it. But the feeling was Friday we could not be creative without making it less than productive. So that's why we did keep the middle schoolers out of school that day. We will find a way to make that up in as painless as way as possible for the families. But let me be clear, I appreciate the compliments, but they go over that way.
And just so the board knows, I mean, I heard this from my high schooler, but there were 8th graders in the high school human anatomy class fully participating in a lab. Talk about like a great experience for an 8th grader if they're thinking about like what high school is like. The teachers and the high school students were very accommodating, and these kids really got to see what it's going to be like for them to be a Weston High School student. It was really awesome to hear some of the stories from that day. So tonight we do need, if there are no further questions regarding the situation here at the middle school, we do actually need to make a vote to ask for this appropriation. The Selectmen and the Board of Finance are expecting us to come to them with this, but we do, for procedural purposes, we do actually need to have that motion in the vote.
I move that the Weston Board of Education approve the capital special appropriation up to $500,000 for emergency repair for Weston Middle School.
Thank you. May I have a second? Thank you, Ruby. Any further comments, discussions, or questions? All right. All in favor? Thank you. Next up, we have our Phase 2 feasibility study update. Yeah. We're just going to relocate since there's a presentation.
Are you ready? I will let my compatriot introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Michelle Miller from Silver Petrocelli and Associates. We're an architecture firm of about 50 architects, engineers, interior designers in Hamden, Connecticut. And we also worked on your Phase 1 study, and we're glad to be back here for your Phase 2.
So we'll go to the next slide. I'm going to set the stage here a little bit, and then Michelle's going to do the bulk of this presentation. When we get into discussion, there may be other members of the advisory committee who are going to want to chime in. Tony Pesco's not here, but I know, Gina, you may want to fill in a little bit. But let me repeat a few key points, bring us all up to speed here. There was a Phase 1 study done, a very comprehensive feasibility study done by Silver Petrocelli that produced, as of November 2017, quite a substantial document. That was a feasibility study, never an actual plan for facility work, but it looked at the entire campus, all aspects of it, everything from the central office to the 4 buildings, to the bus depot, to the flow of traffic and everything, to look at different ways to both think about the conditions of all of our buildings, but other ideas for transforming them. But staying in that major study, again, not a plan for new buildings, but a study using the Foresight model that we now are based on. As then the facility committee and others dug into that, that work just to review entailed the facility committee going into each building to look with the architects at what were the thinking, what was the ideas. Again, not the plans, but just early study. That effort then said, my goodness, there's quite a significant price tag here potentially. It's 5 or 6 years away anyway, so it's good lead planning, good lead work. Are there other ways to look at this? So then the idea of could Weston be based on a 3-site model, that began to emerge, just the question. And we're using the term site intentionally, not school, because in the 3-site models, we'll talk a little more, it's actually the potential combining of 2 schools into 1 site, still having 2 distinct schools in one of those sites, but that idea of 3 sites. Some of us, namely me, had been highly resistant to the idea there'd be any legs to this concept of 3 sites. But as we began to dig into it a little more, a couple seemed to have potential to look at a little more carefully. Let me stress, the whole point here is to make the system stronger, make it better, not to pull it back, not to reduce, not to subtract, but to say, if indeed there's merit within 3 sites, can we actually do our work better, more efficiently, more effectively in those 3 sites? So nobody in this room or within earshot should think this is about a pulling back. And that's a key value point for the district. So we got an echo happening somehow. Someone's calling. It's not me. So somebody's listening and calling in. They're so inspired. So we have an advisory committee. The members are listed on the slide that we just went by. It includes board members, it includes administrators, a parent representative. The charge of this group is to basically get to the point to say to the Board of Education, we think there's merit in digging very deeply into the 3-site idea, or we just don't see it. Where we are right now is bringing to you, and I'm about to hand off the presentation, is to say, here's the work where we are, a work plan is underway to dig into the idea of 3 sites, and then come back to you ideally in April with findings on is it possible to dig more carefully into 3 sites or not, or do we just say we can't do it? So why don't you proceed now?
Okay, so here we're showing your Foresight campus model, your original 4 schools. Oh. Okay. I can, whatever. So we're going to take you through, there's 9 options that have been identified. There's 2 different scenarios with closing 2 different schools and 9 options out of those 2. And we've narrowed it down to 3 options that we're going to go through in more detail. And then we're going to take you through our work plan, which will end hopefully your Board of Ed April meeting. So your current model with the 4 schools here, if you can see, we have listed the facility conditions costs from phase 1, and which totals at $38.1 million for just rectifying all the issues we've addressed, we identified within that study. Then we went on to make further recommendations. So here we identified some small areas of Hurlbut, very little bit at the intermediate school, a heck of a lot at the middle school, and also some at the high school. So this is just a recap of that. And you can see we identify the renovation costs, and then some of those facility conditions decrease because we address them in those renovation costs. So then this totals at about $67.3 million of work at these 4 schools. So here's your scenario 1. This is if Weston Middle School was to close, since this is your greatest needs here. What if this closes? And then option A, you'll see in this first column, brings all of your elementary grades together at Hurlbut. And then your middle school relocates to the intermediate school, and your high school remains the same. This is a rather large elementary school, so then we begin to look at different ways of breaking up the grade structures to lessen that at Hurlbut. And you can see it kind of creates some interesting and more unique grade structure models. We're going to identify the ones that went on. Scenario 2, we would close Hurlbut Elementary School. So Hurlbut gets closed, and then you can see all of these students then would go to the intermediate school. Again, some of the same grade structures working through these options. Do you want to do this one?
As Michelle said, there were 2 scenarios, 9 options across the 2 scenarios. Those 2 scenarios are really the only way to cut it. You've got 4 existing sites, and it was, where might you reduce a site to then have some potential. We, as a committee, and this was led by some of the administrators, but the committee looked at this, for starters said, here are a set of criteria, four areas: educational criteria, facility and logistical criteria, enrollment criteria, financial criteria. As the committee worked, a number of members said, well, let's, going forward, because this is a long process, we're very early in this, would be safety and security, either woven into area number 2, facility and logistics, or separate, but then also school culture. How are you factoring that in? Within educational criteria, I'm not going to go through all of these, but very important, there was the idea of school size. There's a lot of research and understanding about school size, but a number of those options within the scenarios, as you've seen, would create very large elementary schools. Around us, it's atypical to have an elementary school any larger than, say, 500. Fairfield, as a district's been doing research, which we'll get our hands on their optimization, they have the number 504. They don't want to see an elementary school any larger than 504. So part of the thinking was, and here, remember what I said at the beginning, we want to strengthen our district. We provide elementary school second to none. The more I'm in this district, I just see that we are beyond any other district in that regard. And we want to try and hold on to those strengths, and school size matters greatly. Trying to run effectively in an elementary school of some 800 students or even closer to that would not seem to make sense. So a number of the options in the 9 that had that large a population, at least right now, were put to the side. Facility and logistical criteria, the key there is if you have your 3 sites that you're moving into, how do you minimize the amount of construction going on? How many schools are affected by being under construction? So that was a factor. Enrollment, we actually have very solid enrollment data. There are slight variations as to projections and all, but it was looking at what we anticipate to be enrollment, both in the next 5 years, but also out for 10 years. And then the financial criteria, still very, very early, but as you'll see in the charts that were laid out here, that phase 1 study had roughly a total cost estimated. Again, these are very early numbers, but estimated at just north of $60 million. And so knowing that figure, as we go through several of these options, you can see either right now there's some potential financial savings, but it's very early, but that's a whole set of criteria. Within the educational criteria, let me just emphasize that idea of the curricular and co-curricular. That's education talk that's the core of what we do. We did not want to put at risk the core of what we do. So that's those type of criteria, but it's early, those will evolve as we go, but these helped guide us to get from the 9 to the lead 3 that we're now digging into, and particularly the lead 1.
And then from an architectural standpoint, we need to start to study what are these impacts of these reconfigurations on your existing buildings, on the sites. So we came up with a matrix for each of these 9 options. We begin to test fit those based on the knowledge we have from the phase 1 study of your programming. And we approach this with a very simple approach because there's so many options. We just focus on your classrooms. What are the classroom needs? And then we also apply 1 special education classroom per grade. There will be further refinement, and that's where we're moving towards to find out what other program elements need to be brought to each of these reconfigurations. So at this point, the cost is based just on the classrooms. We multiply that square footage by $500 a square foot, and that gives you your overall project costs. So here's the leading option, 1E. In 1E, Hurlbut would remain the same, the intermediate school would remain the same, and the middle school closes. The middle school then, classrooms would be built onto the high school. And this is a scenario where it's 2 schools operating on 1 site. Now these are just diagrams. No one's necessarily proposing this exact layout, but it does show you 3 wings representing each 3 grades. And we felt this was the more logical solution to add on to the building here, although it does wreak havoc on some of your parking and your project adventure course, and there's also wetlands to consider here. So again, this terracotta color is the classrooms you need for the middle school to add on to the high school. Here we hatch in a certain area to show you maybe an office and a cafeteria would go there. And now we're going to get into, the next phase we'll get into what else needs to be brought over to the middle school side to make this work. But the comments you see here on the side are a combination of administration comments and Silver Petrocelli comments. So, you know, this concept maintains excellent attributes at your elementary school level. It creates a secondary building for your middle school and high school, so it would optimize facility resources. It also focuses on 2 of your areas that had the most costs in your facility conditions. You also wouldn't need an alternate site. The students can remain at the middle school while this was to be built. It would interfere very little with the high school. It is unclear how the pool would be managed, and we're kind of not focused on that right at this point. There's some shared resources to create at the middle school, this combination school. There are some state examples. Portland and Canton were just 2 that we knew of, but there's plenty more in the state. This population isn't that large. You're only adding on to 1 building here, and that can focus on the middle school and high school needs. So I can't even read this from here, but this price totals at $40.7 million. And again, there'll be potential to grow as we develop this more because it's just the classrooms included in that price right now. Okay, so option 1D. Again, I can't see very good up there. So Hurlbut now goes to a K through 3. So you're adding 1 grade and you need 10 classrooms to do so. We're proposing to do that here on North House, a 2-story addition to impact on the site as little as possible. The intermediate school then becomes your 4th through 6th grade. And again, we're going to propose a 2-story addition here because the space is limited on this site. The middle school again closes. And here you see a wing added onto the high school for 7th and 8th. This one is actually a 2-story piece. So this one totals at $44 million. And some of the comments here is the elementary school is a reasonable size. You know, it's not getting too large. The conversion of turning the intermediate school into a middle school is a bit complicated because you don't have your sciences, you don't have locker rooms, your technology and engineering spaces, so there's some missing components there. The financial costs are a little more high here, and it's not spending extensive dollars on 2 sites. It's 3 sites here. You might need an alternate site during construction. It's questionable. And the intermediate, Hurlbut now. Adding on to the North House kind of increases that sprawling nature of this school. It's already quite spread, and you're just increasing that. The intermediate school, I had mentioned, it's challenging to add on to. That's the most limited space here, the open grass area. The high school, as I mentioned earlier, this addition would occupy some parking and that project adventure course. And now, it is more complicated. You have 3 construction projects going on at, maybe possibly one time.
Just freeze for a second on now these 2 options. I mean, I think the lead option, just again, and lead option's a key word here. Nobody's charging into this tomorrow. I got to step to the side. Greenwich just opened a brand new school, New Lebanon. They started that process when I was superintendent. That was 6 years ago. At this point, 6 years ago, they were looking at similar drawings of the New Lebanon school. The school that just opened this weekend looked nothing like this. It also had gone through 2 different architecture firms by design. So the first kind of did what you're doing, helping us think it through. Community then decides, can it do it? You got to go out and do a lot. So we're very, very early. But the 1E, against those criteria, you see minimal movement. You work the end that's most expensive, try and minimize the costs there. The numbers are very tricky. Don't get hung up on them. But instead of 60-some million, it's 40-some million. But there are key questions not answered. You come to 1D, and you can begin to see from a criteria standpoint, there are reasons to be concerned. You are beginning to change how you do elementary education because those buildings will be different. You're adding on an area that potentially is playground. You then are looking at construction on 3 sites, which is 3 times your trouble when you're trying to run a school system. But just to grab that moment, show the criteria in play.
Option 2D, we now close Hurlbut. Sorry, I keep trying to use this laser. So now the intermediate school becomes a K through 3. That does start to become a concern. We have to keep everything on one level here because pre-K through 1st grade has to be on your lower level. So only 2nd and 3rd would be upstairs. So that's why there's a larger footprint for an addition here. And even in the front, we're trying to make use, like maybe those could be pre-K rooms. The middle school remains the same. It's 4th through 6th now. So there's no additions needed, but there might be potential reprogramming needed to accommodate a 4th through 6th school. And then the high school over here has the 7th and 8th grade addition over here, similar to the last option. So the elementary school is of reasonable size. Financial costs of the facility are high. Spending extensive dollars on the site with least need is the intermediate school. It doesn't address the facilities of your most troubled facility, the middle school. The intermediate school is, again, a compact, challenging site. The addition may be close to wetlands we have to be concerned about. There's 2 locations of additions here. And again, the high school is occupied on parking and the project adventure course. So this is our timeline for the project. Right now, we're somewhere in the middle there, cannot even read it. But we have a couple more meetings. I currently am programming I just had a meeting with administrators about 2 weeks ago, and we have a meeting with your curriculum leaders. That's been rescheduled 2 times now because of weather and your issues last week. So this week we'll be meeting with them, and with that we'll begin programming and start to come up with design options and estimates. We'll continue to meet with the Facility Advisory Committee, and we'll be back here on the 29th of April to present our hopefully final options. So the next steps, as I was saying, are the programming. We're focusing on that 1E, but we're trying to stick general to gain programming insights on the middle school if it was separate and the high school if it was separate. So we're just defining those requirements. We're going to evaluate the site. We need to explore the wetlands, the fields, and the parking requirements. And then we really begin to test fit concepts and provide estimates based on those. So just showing you the middle school here. This was our programming exercise in phase 1. We're going to, I keep bringing this to meetings and we go over the needs of, your light colored classroom. The light colored yellow are your classrooms. That's the 33 classrooms here that we brought over in those concepts. So now we really want to explore what here would move with them if they were to move over to the high school. And then again, at the high school, could we use and share or not share, and where is the line drawn. So those are the kind of things we're getting into next. So that's where we are at this point. So we're going to complete those, and then again, as I've said, final presentation to the Board of Ed on the 29th.
I just want to chime in a little bit, having sat through the committee meetings to get to this point. One thing just to stress, Dr. McCursey keeps using the word options, and that's where we are right now. The first part of this was really to see, what flexibility we do have, and I guess there are some members of the advisory committee that definitely want to keep more options on the table. And I guess the best way to say is we need to look at this is we had to kind of put a stake in the ground of, okay, if we do this, what does that open up? And a prime example of that is space at Hurlbut. If all of a sudden, if this school is available, is the senior center going to relocate? And this takes us down the path of this plan as we move forward and we involve the other stakeholders in town. This plan can continue to morph and can continue to evolve as we go through the process. And so I think the advisory committee members just wanted that to be out there. This is where we are right now, to be able to deliver our educational model in the way that we want to do it. But things can evolve and things can morph as we work with the other stakeholders in town, because the next phase of this is hopefully in April, this board will endorse a plan to move forward, and that will include creating a larger committee involving stakeholders from the town side as well as move forward in the conversations. So guys, do you have any questions about the plans, any of the process that we've gone through on the committee?
I do. I'm just going to start. Where do I start? So first of all, on all of the renderings, or all the configurations, you have left out cafeteria needs. And some are upwards of 7,000 square feet. Are you using the same dollar per square foot math against the cafeteria, or how would it differ versus classrooms?
At this point, we would use $500 a square foot is what's used.
Okay, so the budget in here is not reflective of a lot of square footage that we're missing.
Yes, like I said, it's all in the classrooms. That's why at least we're comparing apples and apples with each one. When we have so many
comparing apples to apples, but it's not a true reflection of the cost. That's what it's not. It's more than that. So, just saying that out loud.
I mean, at this point, I can grab another mic. I mean, it's a really good question, but we're so early in this. In a sense, we're concept testing. We do have a rough sense of the dollar comparison, but we'd have to come back to that. I mean, major cost potential is, even if you went with option 1E, that you combine into a single site for your secondary school, you still have all the expenses around what to do about this facility, what to do about the middle school. It may be at the end of this, you don't save money in Weston to go down this path. But that layer could be brought in later.
Okay, so let's stick with 1E for right now, since that was your first leading option. Just clarify again, because I know you touched on it, your fourth bullet point, I'm on page 10. Your fourth bullet point here, that will not need alternative site during construction. So where will the children go?
So if this was to be built, students can remain in the high school, students can remain in the middle school. It would wreak havoc on your parking and your fields out here. So it would be an interference, but it's something that could be managed and could be built while occupied.
Yeah, so the middle school would be totally operational. That's the image. And again, don't look at the design that Star Trek has just landed, and that's going to be the look. That's a rendering.
Right.
But it's enough of a rendering to know what is affected spatially. But the middle school would stay totally operational during the construction. You finish construction, and then you just move students. You move in over basically the summer and the equivalent.
Okay. And so it says here that then you will have under one roof, I know it's separate sections, but there are going to be some shared areas, i.e. auditorium, gym, maybe even a cafeteria, even though you have new cafeteria on there. Is there any data out there about what happens when you mix a 6th grader
Well,
with a 12th grader.
Part of the programming work underway, Ken can speak to that, is we're even looking at whether that's reasonable, because it may not be. But that's part of what you begin to get a report back. I don't know, Ken, if you want to speak to that a little.
We're currently in the process. We just obtained some administrative feedback from the middle school and high school. We'll be obtaining feedback from the SILs in terms of programs. Looking at, are there the opportunities for some efficiencies, some shared spaces. Early on, we're seeing with the cafeteria, we're going to need a separate cafeteria for the middle school. We're having those same discussions about auditorium needs, science classrooms, all of those areas. So we'll be able to report back on that. One example of a potential efficiency is with the community classes, which Mike Rizzo has brought up in one of our meetings. But those are the kinds of discussions that are still unfolding at this point. But with a larger group of stakeholders here giving their input.
And let me tie that back to your perceptive dollar questions. The dollars at this point are loose guides at best. Because my hunch is when we come back in April, we're going to begin to show Weston that unfortunately you're probably not going to save a lot of money moving to 3 sites. We're starting to get some pretty strong indications. But let me say very importantly, anyone needs to know we are very serious in Weston now about maximizing every little dollar we have. So we are looking at dramatically changing how we organize the campus. We also have a serious review underway of our entire, as you know, board curriculum and co-curricular program right now. That's underway. So in 2 big thrusts, we're looking at can we do business differently in Weston and do it more efficiently. But I think some of the questions are that you may say it's about the same cost, so maybe you still want to do this approach, but we'll get a better handle on that.
So taking staffing out of the equation, completely, I'm not talking about personnel or staff or anything else like that, taking that out of the equation, what are the operational efficiencies that could be achieved by going to the 3-site model? I'm talking about, whether it be heating and energy, contracting services, shared.
I mean, the only hope would be, and I'd like, if you want to speak from an architecture design standpoint, a newer space would carry some efficiencies, but you're going to be putting in air conditioning. Although I don't know if you want to speak to that, Rich, you could speak to that, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's a brand new, with that being a brand new building, you're going to have more efficient systems. We're going to build that, what do we call it? Like lead, so you can build it energy efficiently. But otherwise, if it's less area, it's going to use less than the current building does. So it should be more efficient, but if you're going to have the same square footage, it's still going to have needs. You know what I mean? But I mean, this is early in the phase for us to really project something like that. But I believe what you would get would be much more efficient than what you have.
So it's likely the utility costs would be higher, not lower. So you'd probably air condition the space of the addition, and odds are you'd probably air condition the back half of the high school. So you're taking unair conditioned space essentially in the middle school and the high school and turning it into air conditioned space. So non-staffing, as you asked for, such as like utilities, you're probably not seeing any savings.
I wanted to ask the second half of that question while Lewis was here, so I'll hold off.
I do want to just say one thing that we've talked about in the advisory committee meetings is, as Dr. McCursey said, when we get to the end, it may not be looking at that $20 million delta. It may be a smaller delta, and we're going to be sitting there, okay, is it worth it? But one thing that is coming out of this is, one of the biggest knocks in our accreditation of the high school was the lack of air conditioning, in the high school. This could address that issue. One of the deficiencies of this particular building is the classrooms are not properly set up to fully optimize the team teaching model, which is, the hallmark of this school and one of its strengths. So do you spend money rehabbing this building and you still don't end up being able to optimally team our classrooms? So we're going to come down to a point where we're going to be looking at things, yes, from a dollars and cents standpoint, but it's going to be what is the most effective use of that dollar to get us the most efficient, best operating school in the end. So.
Gina, during the committee meeting, I think we all voiced our opinions that 1A should have been included in one of the leading options. I think it's important to show it.
Yeah.
So I don't
think- I
recall
think-
when,
I think it's
anyway.
actually, I think that was a typo. I think it was 1D.
I'm on page 18.
That's probably at 900 kids.
But let's talk about it.
Yeah, well, 1A would create a very large elementary school. Do you think you're remembering that correctly? Because you would create almost a 900-student elementary school.
Yeah,
with
and I
1A.
just quickly look back at some data, and back in fiscal, before WIS was built in '03, '04, and '05, when Hurlbut was a K through 4 school, we had even more children in that school. Now, I do know that there was probably some pods used, but I think that it's worth exploring as well, because do you have that slide? Oh,
Well,
we do have that slide.
Well, I
Okay.
guess I'd respectfully ask the board to talk about that, because I'm honestly not recalling the support for this, because that would run counter to some of the major criteria, because you'd be doing two things. You may want to do that, but you as a board need to think it through. I'd urge you to think about that once we bring you back 1E, because you'd be immediately creating almost a 900-student elementary school. No one around that says elementary school's that large. You're taking a building that's based on sprawl. They do not build elementary schools that way anymore, because it would accentuate the dispersion of students greatly. So if that's where the board wants to go, I would respect that, but that would run counter to a lot, and so I don't know if that's indeed the one that you're thinking of, but maybe you are, because you are creating, you're creating a very large elementary building, unlike any other district around here.
But it was built that way to house, but I'm just looking at the number 1 bullet right there, and it said would be too large for effective teaching and learning and nurturing educational environment. I guess I would
Thanks,
just
David.
challenge what's the data out there that supports that.
There's a lot of data on school size. I think we also have our own records and success here. And I think we could definitely come back to that. If the board says, and if there's a consensus of the board, there's an interest in elementary schools that large, or at least that first bullet you find troubling, we can bring back all kinds of data and information on issues of school size as it relates to that. We can have some conversations with our principals about what it would mean to run a building like that. You would be dramatically changing the way you do elementary education in Weston.
Bill, I'd also add that we'd be dramatically changing the way we do middle school education, because the intermediate school is not equipped for the kinds of programs that we have at the middle school. Project Lead the Way, the music programs, the degree to which we have the ensemble. So if you look at really those STEAM kinds of programs, fitting those into an intermediate school, because this model would put 6th to 8th grade in a 3 through 5 building, we're not equipped for that. So there would have to be some major adjustments to that school in order to infuse those programs.
So again, looking just back at what we've historically had in buildings in fiscal 2010, we had 626 students in the WIS middle school.
Right. The number of students, I'm really talking about the programs. Taking our program, Project Lead
Like
the Way.
science.
Project Lead the Way, for example, would not have, the same kind of experience in a regular classroom. Science would not have the kinds of labs that we have at they obviously need to be upgraded at our current middle school. The music programs as well, there's not enough, when you look at the kinds of ensemble space that's needed for multiple ensembles to be, and Dan, you can add in here. So taking a middle school and moving it into an intermediate school, you have to really look at the space, which we can delve into, but that's my initial.
But in response to that specific concern, if you have issues that are going to be an issue no matter what site you choose, then it's important to kind of take them out of the equation for a second. So I understand exactly what you're saying. The science facilities at WIS are not appropriate for middle school science learning. But as we're seeing in the phase 1 study, neither are really the facilities here at the middle school. They're in such need of updating that they're gonna require money either way. So things like that are gonna show up in either scenario, I would almost prefer that they're removed from the equation, because it's gonna be a cost no matter what. I mean, there could be a little bit of a differential in it. But I mean, I just think it's important to keep everything clear that an objection is only an objection if it exists in one situation but not in another. But in the case of the science facilities, in the middle school or the WIS, no matter where we put 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, we're going to need to redo those facilities.
Yeah, let me take a big step back here, and I'm not sure I introduced well. We're a highly functioning system. Our enrollment projections actually are better than some of our area districts. Yeah, we're seeing a 1-2% decline, but that's solid data. That kind of enrollment shifting would say be cautious in the big moves you make. And again, we have a very highly productive academic program. Witnessed last week, we cannot close a building and fit students anywhere. The 2 other districts that had to close, they had places to put students. They didn't lose time. They had to go, Westport had to go out and run a module, but they still could fit. We can't fit other students in a significant way. So at this pass, here's the simple point. Can we analyze a 3-site option with the least amount of moves to see, is that at all palatable? And that's sort of the 1E and the other. And then if it's not, but we still say, is there a 3-site option, then we may begin going back to dig into these others. But I would urge the board, for example, with 1A, to sort of step back to say, this would be a very big move. You not only are combining into a single site I mean, you'd be creating an elementary such as nobody has currently or is building. I mean, no one's going out to build a school like that. So I think if the kind of closer, simpler analysis around sort of the 1E, if that doesn't have merit and the board says, let's still keep looking, then maybe we'd come back to that. Because you'll know in April, you'll have feedback in April on what is there with the 1E option, maybe there's other 2, and then these sort of questions you may say, I don't see 1E, but could you go back and look at these others? Because right now, if we start looking at a whole bunch of other options, we're not going to be able to dig into this with any sort of feedback.
Yeah, and I think the advisory committee, there was more debate about the merits of 1E versus 1D, because at 1D, can you go back to that slide, please? There was discussion about under this scenario, if the senior center moved out of Hurlbut, some of the discussion was you could reclaim those classrooms and you wouldn't need to do construction at Hurlbut. Was the discussion in the advisory committee about this particular plan. That being said, we don't have access to the senior center space right now. So that's what I was trying to allude to as far as we were kind of looking at this. We got to put a stake in the ground to have some place to move on from as far as how we're going to deliver education, and things could morph. This was the plan that there were some members of the advisory committee. That was a twist on it that I think they were interested in. I don't recall 1A being.
No, I do recall 1A being discussed and confirmed it.
Yeah,
Listen, I'm coming from it with a new perspective, right? New blood to the board. And I just think, given the conversations that are happening right now with the budget, given the conversations that are happening now at the state level, we can't be tinkering, right, on what's going to save us a buck here and there. We just need to be forward thinkers and radical thinkers on what is going to save this town money. And if it's a new way of doing things, if it's operating on a K-5 school, which I would probably bet more than 90% of the nation operates on a school on a K-5 system. I certainly went to a K-5 school. Those are the conversations that we need to have.
Yeah, well, and I think the way to structure this, if I may, because a year ago we were stuck. We were stuck at 60+ million. We had the phase 1 study done, very good work. Again, a study. There's been misunderstanding out in the community that was the actual plan to go rebuild the school. It was never that. It was still several major steps away. But we got unstuck by saying, can we begin to look at 3 sites to bring the price down, exactly what you're saying. But then of the 9 options, there really didn't seem to be any other way to organize this, but there were 9 options. The 6 you don't see all have large elementary schools. So what I would recommend, if there's an interest in the board, because right now, any of these numbers, it's the same problem you raised earlier. So these are all apples to apples across all of these charts. So if you're interested in saving money, actually 1E right now is in the lead for the most cost-effective, creative way, least amount of construction, least amount of sudden hidden expenses or logistical problems would be 1E. If by the end of April, and you'll hear back, if 1E is still not satisfactory, then I would say to the board, and maybe you want to lead that discussion, let's go back and look at those 6 options, all which would create very large elementary schools, and is Weston willing to have a very large elementary school? In the committee, actually, nobody went near those 6. The 1D was hanging in there as another idea, and because again, people resonate with the idea of not big elementaries, but the others, 1A, you have the numbers up, that's 896 elementary. 1B, which has not been up, that's a 700 student elementary. You've got 1C, which is 700 student elementary. So it's not the K4, K5, it's the actual size of those schools and what it takes to manage them well. 2A is a 900 student elementary. 2B is a 700 student elementary. The 2C is a 700 elementary. So basically you saw that the cut to get from the 6 to the 3 and then to the 1 to focus was really that elementary school size. If that's
If I can speak to that for a second, Ruby, because I think you made a really good point, which is that, you know, K5 does tend to be the standard. The luxury that other towns have is when they have the K5 model and they have multiple schools at a K5, and when enrollment at one school gets to be too big for the facilities, they simply redistrict. We don't have that because we have one school per band. The challenge is, because I thought the same thing that you did about, you know, looking at the historical data and saying that Hurlbut was a school of that size, but in actuality, Hurlbut was actually 2 schools, because I mean that's where we get the annex from. So you had Kinderland, so you had the kindergarten was completely detached and at another site. So the numbers that show the enrollment in the pre-WIS years, they're a little bit skewed because it wasn't all in that building with or without an addition. It was almost as if it was a separate entity.
No, I also want to challenge the premise on the elementary school of reasonable size. It seems to me, I'm wondering that when you're talking about K-5 schools that are so large to be undesirable, what is the layout of those schools? I mean, we have a unique layout at Hurlbut with all the different houses. And it would seem to me that you would be able to separate children in a way that, you know, if you're talking about an elementary school that's K to 5, that's just, you know, much more compact. Do you have any data?
Oh, yeah, we
that?
could. I think what I would suggest, and coming from the 2 new board members, would be, I'd recommend the following respectfully. Let us get to the end of April. Let us do the analysis around 1E, 1D, because 1E and 1D we get a lot of feedback on. That's the idea of adjusting at the secondary level. Because the other advantage, if you're worried about dollars, we've gone to the most expensive part of phase 1 and said, how do you adjust phase 1? Because you're still left with major expenditures on these others. But anyway, see what you hear back. You may still say, my goodness, I'd rather have this town think about very large elementaries, and then we can begin to come back with the findings and the information that would suggest there are very strong reasons why you don't create a schools within schools for elementaries. But let's.
That may be true. I also think when you're balancing that against an option like 1D or 1E, where you have 6th through 12th grade, you know, in one building. I don't know, I would feel more comfortable, I think, with the K to 5 option.
Again, but I think that would be, I think what we should do is come back and report out, because if we begin chasing these options now, we're not going to be back anytime soon. Because we're trying to understand, is there merit in, you know, bringing together a combined site, 612, you got your most expensive out of phase 1 there. That's a reasonable size school. Other schools have done that to create schools within a school. That age grouping is a much more common move. There's lots of research on that in evidence. And then see if that doesn't hold merit for you as a board, if the costs aren't that dissimilar from what would have been just with the 4 sites, and you say, let's still dig in, we could come back to that. But I would urge the board to have a very careful conversation about wanting to go down the path of what would be uncommonly large elementaries.
I don't want, I think we would need to do a focus group, and I can speak as a parent for me. Square footage doesn't matter to me in terms of the size of the school. It's the quality
Well,
and
I mean
of the
enrollment.
teacher
I
and
mean
the
enrollment.
programs.
Yeah.
So I could care less if it is how many thousand square feet, if I know that the same quality of teachers are teaching the children with the
right.
programs.
No, let me be clear. I'd be talking about the impact of enrollment on the ability to have quality teaching cohesion in a building. But we could come back. No, so what I'm trying to say, I'm ready to have the discussion. I think what I would recommend is that we continue this process. Let us get to the end of April, finish the analysis we're into about 1E, 1D, because that gives us some feedback. And again, nobody's committing then to those options, but we're bringing them back to you as a board to say, here's our understanding of, is there merit here? You may say, as a board, okay, you've heard that, but we're not satisfied. We would like to now really go back now and look at the other end of the situation and examine whether we can have really big elementaries. Do you see the analytical structure I'm trying to provide?
I do, Dr. McCursey. I just am trying to grapple with, is that a good use of time and money when those three options that we're looking at are all 40 million plus, and I'm talking about a 20 million option?
What
It's
is
not a
the,
twen-
it's
what-
20 million, but that's not inclusive of the facility upgrade.
That's
So
what's
what would,
on 1A.
what would be the,
It's not 20 million.
I'm just reading what's on here.
right, well, it's, yeah, but it's, if you see, it's not inclusive
Yeah,
of the,
okay.
so what are the costs of the facility upgrades that would still need to be done?
It would add about another 20 million. That's what, I'm just looking at the top row of the other ones where we have it, and it totals at 20.8 million in facilities, if we leave the middle school out.
See, what we didn't present here because we were focused right now on the three, but we didn't layer in.
The facilities at that
We
time.
we can send that to you and post it publicly so everybody has it. We should do that because it's not a 20 million option at all. We left out
Yeah.
because we focused in on the lead three, and I apologize if
Yeah,
there was
Ruby,
no
but
desire to mislead here.
Yeah, the advisory committee looked at this format for all the options,
Uh-huh.
and then the three options that were considered most viable, and then the other two that were there for discussion purposes is what they brought forward, that has the facility conditions from phase one and the projected construction from this discussion. 1A, since it didn't really move forward at all, doesn't have the other work that would be necessary. So it's not an apples to apples with the three that are viable.
I want to make a suggestion, but I have a quick question, and I think it's a question to be addressed at a future time. But Louis, I asked a question before when you were out of the room perhaps, about what would be the operational changes from moving from 4 sites to 3 sites. I think the question that's going to be out there, certainly from the public's standpoint, is right now you have 4 schools, you have 4 of everything. When you move to 3 schools or 3 sites or whatever you want to call it, why can't you just have 3 of everything?
Oh, well, it really depends on what you're talking about. So obviously for the teaching staff, there is no real change. You still have the same number of students, assuming you want to keep the same class sizes, you're talking about the same number of teachers, thus also the same number of paras. As far as support staff, I mean, part of the problem is when you have a large school, we have very small levels of support staffing in the schools. We've been reducing it a little bit each year for years. And part of the problem is it's hard to tell you right now, well, how many administrative assistants wouldn't we need? Because you're dealing with the same number of kids and you're dealing with the same number of parents of those kids, which is a big constituency for our staff. As far as principals go, yes, you could in theory have 1 principal for a single school, not 2. However, given the size of the population, depending on the size of the school, the number of assistant principals may have to remain the same because you have to evaluate the same number of teachers. You have to you may even have to add an assistant principal because you have to evaluate the same number of teachers, you have to supervise the same number of children. That's really a different issue. Custodians are not done by buildings, they're done by square footage generally. So how much square footage are we trying to take care of? If you enlarge a particular building and close another building, depending on the square footage, you may be able to save some staff but not others. Really, the only thing I could envision from a, because you need to have a principal of a building, would be possibly, if you had 3 buildings, reducing 1 principal, but I do believe you would end up having to add an assistant principal position. There's slightly less cost, but still bearing benefits and that sort of thing.
So our staffing, whether it be facilities
It
or
wouldn't
educational,
change
is,
much.
is
Staffing
done on,
wouldn't
it's
change.
done on a per capita basis or a per square footage
Oh.
basis, and not necessarily a per.
Right, so you still have the same, in fact, if the middle school's in here anymore, you're gonna have another field, but you still have the same amount of field space, although part of it you'll be building onto part of the field. So groundskeeping really wouldn't change. Your custodial staff, unless the total square footage goes down, which it may, because under some of these options, you're eliminating a building. You might be able to eliminate 1 custodian. Security might change, but again, you still have the same number of kids. So you're still trying to deal with the same number of people coming into the buildings, but you would only have 3 buildings. So on that level, there would be very minor changes in staffing is what I'm trying to say, unless the actual student population goes down, in which case, then of course, you have enrollment-driven reductions in teaching staff and para staff and so forth.
Okay, thank you, that was helpful. There are certainly more questions. I know I have more questions. I think that, Ruby has brought up some good questions. I think we're a little bit hamstrung by the fact that neither the chair of our facilities committee nor our representative on this council is here tonight, in Tony and Ellen. And so I almost feel like having them here, maybe tabling this conversation until our March meeting when they could be here.
Yeah, this
would
was
be a
just
little
an
bit more
this was
helpful.
just an update. There's no action by us tonight.
Right.
Everything is moving forward, and it's just good feedback for the team to have as far as fleshing out additional questions that they're going to have to answer. So there's
But I think for those of us who weren't in on the process, we have some process questions that could very easily be spoken to by our
Well,
colleagues that.
Yeah, I mean, a very key observation is that if part of the interest in those other the large elementaries is it look like a lot less expensive, it's not. So we can, I think we should before April update these charts, repost them, so then you have those, because what looks like a 20 million option is actually close to 40 million. Again, it's tricky to compare these numbers. But I guess I would ask the board, because by end of April, we hope to come back with some feedback on 3 sites that you may say, gosh, that approach isn't what we'd like you to then go back and look at it. If part of the interest is we think you've missed some far less expensive options, we just can show that we haven't. They're all pretty close. Then it gets into questions about, are you willing to have very large elementaries or whatever that is?
What kind of funding is available from the state for school construction? I paused when I asked that because I think I know the answer, but the question has to at least be asked.
So prior to the current governor, Weston's reimbursement rate is 23% of eligible expenditures. So not every, so if it's $40 million, it's not going to be 23% of necessarily $40 million. Things like soft costs and things like that are not considered eligible. In the governor's budget, he is looking to significantly reduce debt and the amount of money that the state borrows. The reimbursement rate is essentially the state issuing bonds for school construction, so there's a strong possibility that reimbursement rates will decline.
I can add to that. I mean, one of the things that's been discussed in the whole regionalization debate as well is in the governor's office putting out a new bill having to do with a incentive-based sort of way, setting up a committee, but also talking about incentives. One of them is sort of, I wouldn't call it incentive, I would call it, it's just an obstacle, but it would be to reward schools that regionalize with more money. That's just one idea of many, so please don't take that as gospel. But we are not in the same position we were before with regard to reimbursement. Rich, that's correct? Correct.
So, because we did speak about 1A in the committee meeting as being an option that not just myself vocalized, if there's a way to add it in to one of your leading options, just so that we can see the detailed work around it, Because I think when you come in April and you show the detailed work on 1E, 1D, and 2D, I think some of us are still gonna have questions around 1A.
Oh, and I think that's to be expected. I guess I would ask that let us get through this, because this is the first I've heard of 1A. I mean, through the advisory committee, nobody flagged 1A. It's in a bundle, the advisory committee. It's in a bundle, there are about 5 or 6 options that then we could go back and look at. They all fit within this realm of, are we willing to do a very large elementary? That was the decision rule that kept them from being in that top group. So what I would suggest, given that we were frozen last year, we had no way to move forward on this. We finally broke forward to say, let's begin to look at this one approach on the 3 site. Let us come back the end of April, because frankly, we cannot go back and add another option right now. I think rather we could get through this study. We're not then saying that is the option, but at least we've analyzed a 3-site option. We've had educators look at it, see if it can fit. It may not work. It may say it's still just as costly, so then it'd be very natural for the board, because they have time to say, okay, that approach to 3-site worked, now could you look at this? I'm not sure how we would reconfigure this work now to look at this. We could do a parallel effort. I'm not sure we have time in the next several weeks with everything to do the analysis around school size. And what I mean by school size is that's enrollment. I'm not, that's sort of, that's the phrase we mean by enrollment, not the physical space. But and now the board could vote and say, please go do this, but I'd ask the full board to take a stance on this. If you want us to change the analytical approach right now and change the way we're doing this work, if that's what the board wants, we'll do that. My recommendation right now would be not to do that. Let us get through this phase. You still have lots of chance to go back and look at other options. But again, it'd be, are you willing to go look at options that are very big elementaries, unlike any other district around us? And that would be
As
the
a
question.
K through 5 option, yes. That's fine.
I want to make sure that this work moves forward, and I'm
Well, here's what
reticent to supplant my judgment for the work of the committee that has already identified that as an issue and dismissed it. So while I'm not ruling it out, I'm not saying I want to move in that direction either. I'd want to hear from
So,
Tony and Ellen.
Yeah,
on that.
here's what I would suggest. I mean, we have people can come back. I mean, I've got 2 elementary principals, about as expert as you get, who could come back with Ken and me and with Mike, because it's going to relate heavily to the special ed realm. What's it mean to run a building that big? And why do no other districts around us build elementary schools that big? Given we're in the budget season, we've got other decisions and work to do with them, I'm a little reluctant to ask the team to do that right now. Once we get through April, but if the board's insistent that you want understanding on this big elementary issue, we'll come back in April with that as the question, because that's what kept those 6 off the list. If I'm being clear, what kept them off the list was just elementary is too big. We didn't think there was the appetite in Weston for that. If you're telling me there is the appetite, then we could at least as a preliminary look come back and say, here's the research on large elementaries, here's where they're being built, here's what it means from a management and staffing standpoint. I'm not sure we can do that well by the end of April, but we'll take a shot at it. It's not involving the architects in the design works, it's simply at the core, what's it mean to have such a large elementary school?
I didn't know that there was such a large appetite for 6 through 12 being under one roof.
No, it's the number. It's the number of students. There's not a large appetite for 6 through 12. We're trying to understand it
Either way, you're
all.
going with a school within a school model, and what I'm hearing tonight is that it's more appropriate to do a school within a school. I mean, if you look at the design, the middle school wing is a middle school wing. It's entirely that. And from what I'm hearing is that it's more educationally appropriate to have that model with upper levels than it is with the lower levels.
Yeah.
When 90% of America operates on a K through 5
But that,
environment.
no,
I think that's an
not-
apples to oranges comparison.
because
but that's not been the let me just jump in. That's not been the consideration. We're not saying K through 5. We're saying number of students in the building.
Yeah.
If you as a board are saying you're willing to have elementary schools with as many as 800 students, we can go look at that. I'm just saying that, so it was in.
But Bill, we were there before. That's
And
what
there are-
I'm trying,
And-
I-
and
and I
it's-
would love to be educated on this, on what it felt like to have that many students in that building in the current square footage that it is today.
So that's what I think that Bill's suggestion of the work that the advisory committee has done is, we essentially will be ripping everything apart to go back now, and we lose all the work that's been done. Let the work continue, and then let Bill and his team come back, because even the advisory committee, when we heard about the Fairfield report that came out, the 504 being the optimal number for an elementary school, we've asked to try to for Build a Network and to get that. Let's have a parallel path going where we can continue moving forward to see if we have an option that works for a 3-site district, and at the same time, Bill knows that there needs to be some education. I mean, Bill's gotten very used to me telling him, like, it's okay to say this is the way something is, but there's got to be some education behind it and the facts behind it to back it up as to why that's the way it is. And so it is perfectly reasonable to say, hey, we need to be educated on why is this the optimal number for an education for this grade level? Why is it an optimum number for education at that level? Why, you know, is the culture, like, we added that to the conversation. That goes to the age ranges that you have mixed together in a facility. So the work that's been done has been very deliberate about moving down the path. And there was the idea of that large of an elementary school, when we say that number of students, is not something that anyone was prepared to accept. I think the key point to remember is it's not a judgment of a K-5 school or a K-2 school. It's the judgment of having an elementary school that only has a certain number of students. You know,
Gina, to that point, I think it's very important, but I hear Ruby's question, and I think that, you know, speaking for myself, I could be ready to dismiss that, but the fact of the matter is that
yes.
we had an elementary school that had 800 or 900 kids for a number of years, but we don't have the history. None of us were here during that time, so we don't have the history of what that was like, why it was not advisable, why it's not something we want to go back to. So almost separate from asking the committee to do anything different, I do think that's a question
Yes.
that's out there. It's unanswered.
but I just don't want to stop the work on the other two.
No, but on a
at-
parallel path, I think it would be appropriate for Dr. McCursey
agreed.
to work with his team to get us a narrative of to shed a little more light about what the situation was like specifically here in Weston when our elementary school was that size.
So to boil down to 2 criteria. The ones you have as the lead options in front of you were potentially the most cost effective. We are taking the most expensive work, because you still got to do the facility conditions and you still got to do the renovations. And the most expensive were here in the high school. So saying if you move to 3 sites, can by focusing your 3-site work there, can you save the most amount of money? So that's what we're looking at now. We also, as a criteria, said, and this is the first I've heard such energy on it, there had been no energy before on such large elementary schools. Patty and Laura do not support large elementaries at all. I support Patty and Laura. I don't support it. But I am quite prepared to come back to the board, because if you ask the question, we'll answer it. In April, come back beginning to say, here is what we know about large elementaries, how you manage them, how you run them, and what the consequences and effects are. So we'd be coming back on a study looking at dollars, because I've heard dollars are a big concern. We wouldn't be doing this if we didn't have a dollar concern. That's the only reason, frankly, we're into this whole thing, is because of dollars. If we had $60, $70 million, don't worry, Weston taxpayers, we'd have 4 schools, we'd do this place, move on. You know, that's 6, 7 years of work, but we'd do that. But because of that concern, we said, what's more cost effective? So that we'd come back to you with, still very, very early. We could do some work just on that first criteria. What does it mean to have larger elementaries? Because if then, as you as a board say, we actually have an appetite for that, that opens up 6 other options that we had put to the side, not just the one that you flagged here. But I'm trying to find decision rules and criteria that guide us through what's a very complicated process. So I don't know if that's clear and helpful.
Yeah, and one thing. And Bill, I also think one thing that might help with this conversation, and we've talked about it before, that we're going to need to substantiate to other audiences in town, but I think for this board it would be beneficial as well, is the idea of there was that number floating out that the as-built for this district with the once WIS was built, was 3,000-ish students. And so people are having, trouble understanding, okay, you only have 2,300 now. Why don't you just close a school and move into a building and not fit? We know there's been an evolution in education and an evolution of the programming that's offered. Some of those evolutions at Hurlbut may go to answering these questions of how we used to have, 800, 900 students in that building with elementary education, but now you only have a lesser number because we're doing more things and taking up space, delivering those things. I think we've been very vocal about we're gonna need to do that, but it may be that this board needs to see it sooner rather than later to help answer some of these very questions.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I don't think anybody's advocating or pushing for large elementary schools. It's just when you look at some of these models and you have schools, 6 through 12, and you're touching, our blue ribbon high school and turning it into a 6 to 12 facility, I think you have to, in order to be responsible, look at an option of a larger elementary school and preserve the high school the way that it is. I just would like to have, more
Yeah,
information
well,
on that back.
no, but we're looking at again, what will come back in April, and Ken's already begun digging into that. We may come back and say you educationally can't make that you may not make 1E work. We may come back at the end of April and say that your most cost-effective solution to save money will not work educationally. You're putting too much at risk. I mean, we may come back and say, that's some of the early feedback is this. So again, I think the other part I think we should do a review of the phase 1 study, because the phase 1 study answers that question about the right sizing. We're about 2,600 students. Some sense built for over 3,000, but we're actually at 2,600.
But I know phase 1 talks about our current usage, but I think we've got to do that comparative analysis.
No, I understand. What I'm saying is, given rightly so new board members, and we're at 2 headed to 3, that means that have not been part of that phase 1 reporting out. And since this is phase 2 of phase 1, I think we should do that. So I think part of the April reporting out, if the board agrees, would be we come back with 1E, what we've learned about 1D. Is there any potential with this at a combined secondary school or not? We may come back and say maybe, maybe not. Do a little more explanation of what that phase 1 study was on some of these key questions. What's the right sizing? Try and find the time to come back and say on this question of reasonable elementary school size, why the administration feels so strong about this. You may choose to disagree with us, but I know to a person we feel this way, and also can bring the research into it, which we're looking at that too. So you'll have that as a board. So you'll have best financial bet 1E, because it is. Does that get us anywhere? If not, then, are there other risks to the secondary school that you don't want to touch? You'll then have some feedback on large elementary schools. We also can do the update on the phase 1 study, so there'll be quite a lot to do. But from that, you then can say, okay, where do we head? Is that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And that satisfies the questions,
Did that give you
concerns
guys
here.
the information you need? Okay. That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
Dan, are you good with that? Thank you.
Thank you.
Rich, do you want to start virtual net metering?
So this is really just an update. We had talked about this at facilities in November. The town has an opportunity to move its virtual net metering accounts to a new megawatt with Centrine Power. So they're looking, so in order to kind of avoid and alleviate some of the burden of the billing back and forth and the tracking and allocation of some of the accounts that are commingled, they're looking to move their accounts to this new megawatt with Centrine Power. That would then allow the Board of Ed to essentially have its accounts on ALCO, which is the existing account. In order to do this and the town to fulfill their megawatt, we would just have to move Hurlbut to that new megawatt. It would allow the potential to move the xenon plant onto the ALCO account. So the town is looking to approve that, I think, at their next Selectmen meeting.
Do we have an idea of what that would expand as far as our potential savings under the virtual net metering?
Well, if we look at the savings that were presented on the initial one, they were substantially off.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't come anywhere near what the actual projected savings were, so it's really too early to tell. You really need a year of actual data to come to a good conclusion.
Okay. All right. So this was just for information purposes. We've kind of viewed this as just a management decision since we voted a year ago to enter into virtual net metering, and now it's just kind of an administrative issue for the administrative team to deal with. Rich, financial update?
So this is the financial report through January. Through January, we have spent $28.1 million with encumbrances totaling $22.3 million, special education tuition encumbrance holds of $185,000, anticipated expenditures of just shy of $1 million, leaving a projected deficit of $178,711. There are transfers totaling $94,207 for approval, with two in excess of $5,000. The first is $30,000 for special education legal fees, and then $19,786 to partially extinguish the special education out-of-district tuition and settlement deficit. And then moving to the Internal Services Fund on page 38, we have a net change of negative $16,147 for dental insurance, but the fund balance remains at just above $1.5 million.
I think we have to wait on Dan. I only have 3 members at the moment.
Poor thing.
That's a new one.
You know, I mean, yeah, I think that's your best bet.
Okay.
Take a 2-minute recess.
I just like, yeah.
I would just suggest you just declare the meeting in recess as chair for a few moments.
All right, so we will take a few minutes recess. Thank you. We recessed. We are back in session.
Sorry, folks.
That's okay. Do you want Rich to run? Did you
No,
review?
thank you. I'm fine.
Okay. All right. If I could have a motion, please.
You wanna go? I move that the Weston Board of Education approve the 7th fiscal year 19 financial update and approval of transfers presented by Mr. Richard Rudolph.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? All in favor? Thank you. Louis?
Okay, I think your next item is the child rearing leave request. This is for one of our Hess Hurlbut teachers, Megan Hannigan, formerly Megan Sobolski. She is on leave this year. By teacher contract, they're allowed to request a second year, but that is up to the board. The administration is recommending we approve it for 2 reasons. Obviously, we support Ms. Hannigan. but also given the budget climate and the current cuts that have already occurred with the budget, we will need to be reducing teachers, and this would allow us to at least keep one of our very good teachers for another year.
Could I have a motion, please?
Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the child care leave request from Megan Hannigan effective for the 2019 and 2020 school year.
May I have a second, please? Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay. If I could have a vote, please. All in favor? Thank you. First read, new policy, prohibition against alcohol, drugs, smoking, e-cigarettes, and vaping.
So just some quick points on this. I think all 4 board members were present when this was discussed in policy. One is a member of the public, the other committee is here. But just some key points for anyone who may be interested. The current policy, 1256, prohibits smoking, use of e-cigarettes and vapor products anywhere on school property by anyone. So this particular policy is a community policy, so it applies to anyone who's on school grounds, not just students and teachers. There are separate policies that also address that, but this is really more directed at anybody who's on school grounds. So the first change you see is just a change in the title. It already had covered e-cigarettes and vapor products, but we added that here. The big change in this policy, and the reason it was brought forward, had to do with the increased use of alcohol at certain events by members of the community, most notably the Memorial Day Fair portion on school property. As the board may or may not know, the area where the fair is conducted partially on school property and partially on town property. The concert portions that had been occurring were occurring on town property, but people were bringing the alcohol onto school property. There's a lot of small children there, and we don't want to see that happen. That was the genesis of addressing this issue. There was no specific policy with regard to community members drinking on school property until this policy. Clearly, students and staff were banned from doing so, but this addresses that. There is one big exception built into this policy, which is the entire second paragraph, which has to do with the July 4th fireworks, or whenever they're held, the Independence Day fireworks. Usually it is on July 4th. But and that exception would occur if only during the hours of the scheduled event as scheduled by the town of Weston, only as permitted by the town of Weston, and only as the town of Weston may allow it, the areas it allows it to occur in. In no case would the consumption or possession of alcohol be permitted in any of our buildings or facilities or other structures, but as far as the area of the fireworks that's designated by the town to view the fireworks, this policy would be the sole exception to this policy. It would apply at your football games, your trunk or treat at the intermediate school, at other events. Alcohol would be prohibited to be possessed and consumed. Other minor changes are really more just to bring it in line with some of our other policies to refer to school property with a defined term, which is, well, all of our property as well as all of the buildings, and to get rid of some of the old language about real property versus, whatever. So that's just cleanup. The really big issue here, the substantive issue, is the banning of alcohol on school grounds, or the exception of alcohol as may be permitted by the town during the fireworks. This is a first reading. No actions required tonight, but I can answer any questions you may have.
Any further questions?
And as I pointed out, the board members who were present were there to ask a lot of questions. We had a long discussion about this in our policy committee meeting. So,
First reading for pesticides.
sure. So the board has an existing pesticide application policy. It's called Hazardous Materials in Schools, which isn't really what the policy is specifically about, so we changed the title. Everything in here is recommended by your outside firm, Shipman and Goodwin's Policy Service. There are a number of changes. There's a lot of restrictions, obviously, on when we can use pesticides on school property. We can't use it on anything below 8th grade, for instance, unless in an emergency situation, such as some sort of dangerous infestation of some sort. A pesticide includes fungicides and herbicides as well. So there are various restrictions when we can use it, notice that must be given. The only change that I recommended in addition to Shipman and Goodwin's change, which really reflects the nature of our campus, is that the notice provisions that goes out to families and staff regarding the application of materials at the school buildings, I extended to the central office, so that a central office employee should also be notified if there's going to be a pesticide application. Everything else is literally recommended by our outside counsel, and it reflects current law and regulations in the state.
Any questions? And again, the policy committee is the committee that is actually present tonight, so they ask lots of questions about this. Moving on, thank you. On to old business. Second reading of the civility policy.
Yes, thank you. So at the last meeting, I gave a lot of information as to why the board, we were asking the board this year to review the civility policy. Civility policy was originally passed back in 2002, hasn't been reviewed since then. It has been used frequently, both with staff as well as dealing with staff interaction with each other, with parents, with members of the community, but also members of the community with our staff. We added some additional protections with regard to emails specifically. Emails must also remain civil. They cannot include profanity or other sort of similar communications. We added the concept of, or threatening or abusive emails, obviously. We added the concept with regard to electronic communications, the repeated use of emails, voicemails, and other communications intended to harass the recipient. Now, that doesn't mean you can't send a bunch of emails, but if you're doing it for the specific purposes of aggravating one of our staff members, the staff member has a right to not respond, notify administration, and then we would take the appropriate steps. We've seen civility issues just ranging from very simple, rude behavior where some obscenity has been used all the way up until threats of violence. And this policy deals with that whole range, and it empowers members of the staff who feel that way to address it, to if they get someone screaming at them on a phone, they can say, "I'm sorry, I'm ending this phone call." And then the other way, members of the community also have a right not to be treated uncivilly by our staff. And if that were to happen, obviously we have disciplinary consequences we can impose as a district. So this policy we brought forward with the hope that you would embrace it, renew it, and there will be a communication plan for this policy, which we'll discuss at next week's policy committee meeting to talk about how we're going to roll this out. It will be posted on the website right away, but we think this policy is one that really requires a very specific reminder to both our staff and our school community at large, of the need to behave civilly with our, here on campus and electronically.
May I have a motion, please?
I move that the Weston Board of Education approve policy 1255, civility.
May I have a second? Thank you, Ruby. Any questions? I just would like to say I'm actually very pleased that the board took the time to review this policy because I do think it's important that our staff feel like that they have a way to manage this situation. I think it's important that our families understand they have rights if it's happening to them. But I also think just, as far as starting a broader conversation about how we and have exchanges with each other in a civil manner. And I just think with a lot of things going on in our country right now, and even as we go down this road of talking about regionalization, which is becoming a very emotional, hot button topic, I think it's just very timely that we dealt with this, and I want to applaud you for bringing it forward on behalf of our staff and our families.
Of
Thank
course,
you.
thank you. Thank you for bringing it and passing it.
All in favor? Thank you. Dr. McCursey.
So the superintendent's report, given we're getting late in the hour, I'll be brief. I'm going to turn to Ken Craw, though, for an important little update in a second. You got a moment, Ken. Don't rush. The superintendent notes, trying to get the frequency back up to weekly. They were out this weekend for Friday. We talked at length, I think, about Thursday, but I put in a statement from Ken on that day, the creative flexibility day. Again, I can't say enough of how much the team stepped up to make that work. Lisa, Dan, and the others working with Ken, and to just really come up with very good creative programming that was relevant for our students. I also flagged in the super notes the work on legislation pending. We've talked about that tonight, so I don't need to reiterate that, but I put in again, I hope it came through in the email, Kevin Smith's latest statement on this, which is excellent. And I think I'm going to go forward and give full credit to Kevin, and who's a good colleague, and start trumpeting his stuff out as well. There is the session I mentioned this Friday. You know about that. Lewis will be going up to that, trying to work to get, as I mentioned earlier, a spot for Lewis at the table, giving testimony. But you don't need to worry. There's a lot of pressure against this underway. So I think letters and things from Weston will help, but there's a lot of pressure out there. There's been some requests for compensation data, so I'm going to pass around, and we'll distribute it otherwise to the board. All this is public information, public record, but it's for central administration. Sorry, Mike, it also includes numbers of assistants relative to each administrator. So we have that information. We've been requested to receive that. Meredith, if you grab this, I think there's enough for the public to have it tonight.
Yeah, I was going to
Yep.
leave a few out.
We can discuss that as you like, but I want to make sure you get that and have it. There should be nothing new to here, since it's all been in records you've seen. Again, we've had some requests, but I want you as a board to have it first, and then we'll distribute it as asked from members of the community. I think, Ken, now, if you're ready to talk about.
So on Friday, the state accountability reports were released, and this is essentially the state's attempt at reporting a district and school report card. And so what we do each year now is take a look at those results, and the state distills down district and school performance down to one number, an accountability index score. So what I'll be doing at the March Curriculum Committee meeting, among other agenda items, is talking about the results, those reports, what they mean for Weston, and generally for the district in each school, there are multiple indicators associated with that number. So we can talk about that, but the accountability reports, just for a little bit of background, rely heavily on the state annual testing results. So the Smarter Balance results for grades 3 through 8, and the school day SAT for the high school. And so, for example, 93% of the accountability index score for WIS is based on their ELA and math performance results as it relates to general education, special education, and the degree of growth. They do work in a growth index from year to year. So I'll be putting this all in a memo that you'll be receiving from Bill on Friday in anticipation of our March Curriculum Committee meeting. And I'll just briefly share that our performance as a district, our index score was 86.5%. This represents the 6th highest score in the state and the 3rd highest in the DIRG. But really, you need to kind of look at all the different factors that go into that for the district and for the school, because there are things such as our graduation rate, our absenteeism rate for students, arts access, physical fitness that are also built in, which we can talk about, and I'll share sort of an overview in that memo. So more to come.
The final item, and Ruby was there today, we had Vipin in district working with, I think, 6 or 8 other districts were there. I'm not sure at the end of it we gave Vipin what he wanted in terms of we're ready to go as a regional body, but it was a very productive day, I think very inspirational for people there. I really want to thank Mike for stepping up to organize that quite actively with Megan Skelton. But I don't know if Mike or Ruby want to share anything, because I think it was a good day, very good turnout, and there will be a next step. We're going to try and find time to bring people back together in some way to begin moving on the sort of regional work that Vipin would hope. It's a change maker's approach. It's kind of actually David's embodying with the vaping issue sort of what Vipin hopes, that you get multiple levels of creativity to solve problems, and if that, it's not an isolated individual, but done through an organized collective process. So I don't know if you want to add to anything.
When you and Megan brought change makers and Vipin to the community, what was it, back in 2017, I think it was, November of 2017, I was not a board member. I didn't have an educational hat on. I just went to what sounded like a very interesting presentation as an active parent and a citizen of this sweet community. I left that presentation so impacted and so inspired. And quite frankly, Vipin was asking me, but give me more, what did you feel like that day? I go, I felt powerful. Like, I felt like he gave me a sword and a shield for tools to be a change maker in not only my family, but in the community. So that's kind of when I fell in love with the whole idea of EI and change makers and Vipin. Now fast forward, and I think Dr. McCursey, I mentioned to you, I thought it was incredibly innovative and forward thinking to bring something like this to the community. And I've mentioned a couple times where, there are businesses out there, my husband works for one of them, where, you are tested every single week on your EIQ, or you're hired based on your EIQ, or you walk into a meeting and everyone knows your EIQ and how to deal with you. So it's very prevalent now in terms of how one can be successful in the current business world. That coupled with, I want to applaud you again for being proactive in reaching out to our community, not just the district, but other districts as well, as how can we include everybody and take advantage of this wonderful program. So I think everyone, Mike, you can add, I think everyone got something out of today, and I think we'll now just have to wait for kind of the consensus of the community in terms of how we embrace change makers.
I totally agree with everything you said, and I think what struck me from the day was there was a range of people in that room, from a retired police chief to principals. Laura Cleary was there from Youth Services, so really a range of community members from several different districts, and you're struck by what it takes to do this for our children. It takes that community-wide effort. It takes that energy that Ruby has to really make it work. So I think it was a great first step, very inspiring, and I'm optimistic that it's going to get some legs.
Yeah, and again, the linchpin here is Megan Skelton. I mean, if we didn't have Megan as one of the fellows, we wouldn't have had the introduction, and she pushed, prodded, and reminded me that we had to keep moving on this, and then Mike actually helped then make it happen with Megan. So more work for sure to see how this proceeds, but at least a good piece. And for those of you, when you get back to the super notes, there was that reminder of just what it was, so it makes sense of this, because it's not necessarily an easy grasp, but it's how do you get people working together across multiple communities for good change for kids is basically one way to put it.
But it was also, Dr. McCursey, of you thinking out of the box on, okay, let's not incur the entire financial burden.
Right.
What can we do to lessen that, but still take advantage of such a great program?
Yep.
So it was great to meet the other districts and
Yep.
to share that with them.
Yep, great.
And so we have committee reports. First of all, obviously with the board in transition again, once we know who our newest member will be, I will be chatting with everybody again, getting a feel of where you think you may want to put your extra efforts on committees. And I will get those assignments out as soon as possible after we know who our person is. That being said, do we have any reports? I mean, policy, we've kind of had your meeting here. Finance, very complete report. I guess the biggest thing is, we are working on some stuff through curriculum that's kind of exciting, looking at middle school and things like that will be coming back around in March. So I think that's where we are for right now. Anything from WEF, Ruby?
No, just to, WEF actually attended today's presentation with Changemakers, so they were able to kind of witness firsthand and showed the same level of interest at the end of the presentation. So I think that kind of piqued their appetite in terms of how they can be a part of it.
All right, great, thank you. Principals' reports will be online and emailed out to all of our families. Excellent source of information about what's going on in our schools. And also, don't be afraid. Read the next school. Read the school you left behind. It's always a lot. It's always cool to see what's happening outside of your own little community here in Weston. Next up, regular meetings. We have March 25th. We also start our Board of Finance presentations on March 6th, and we'll be working through that process. We are continuing with efforts to get the tri-board meetings scheduled with the state legislatures. March 14th is not happening. One of them has a conflict. I will be in touch as soon as we have the next possible date. And we are set for April 8th for our workshop. Time is still to be determined. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't think we've said, ideally it'd be during the day. Hopefully that works for board members.
Okay. And also you should plan on in March, March 25th, based on today, you will have an executive session to continue discussions around that particular matter. And Mike, are you ready to, do you have a date yet, or you just want to let people know we're going to be pursuing another special ed legal executive session?
Yes, we are in the process of scheduling an executive session on pending special education legal matters. So as soon as we have that date set, we'll post the appropriate notice and have that meeting.
Great, thank you.
We're trying to do that one during the day as well.
Awesome, thank you. Just particularly for new board members, sometimes some of the complexities of discussing special ed, under a guise of our legal counsel for special ed, it's educational and informative way to learn about some of the things that we have to manage. Bill, review of pending items for the next meeting?
Right, we have a grid document. I don't have mine in front of me, but I have it pretty much memorized. We look at that at this point in the meeting every month to sort of look ahead. The main kind of out of the ordinary item next month would be the first look at the calendars. So the calendar committee's been meeting. They'll be meeting again prior to that late March meeting, but we'll bring to you as a board the first pass at looking at is the calendar for next year, which we tend not to change unless there's a big issue. Is that still looking correct? And then the out year 2021 calendar is a real pivot one to look at. So that would be the main item.
All right. Anything else? If not, could I have a motion to adjourn, please? Thank you. And we are adjourned. Yay! 10 o'clock. I was aiming for 10 o'clock.
You got it. You landed the plane.